Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning.
There was once a fellow who went to the doctor and he said, I'm having problems with my memory. What should I do? The doctor said, pay me first now for your visit, then we'll talk about There are many things that we need to remember. And Torah tells us, when we say it after davening, Sheish Zechirai, 6 remembrances, that every single day we have to remember. And this is every day of the year. Weekdays, Shabbos, Yom Kippur, we're always mentioning these 6 remembrances. Other communities have 10 remembrances that they say. And one of these remembrances, among them, is remembering what Amalek did, the fact that Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, remembering Shabbos. But one of them is from this week's Parsha, and that's the importance to remember what happened with Miriam, what Hashem did to Miriam when she went out of Mitzrayim. On the way out of Mitzrayim, while we were in the desert. And the story from this week's Parsha that happened with Miriam is that Miriam was talking to Aaron, her brother, about Moshe, their brother, in a negative way. What they were talking about is the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu separated himself, apparently, from his wife, from Tzipora. Here's the background to this story. While the Jewish people were in the desert, there were 2 individuals, Eldad and Medad. These were unauthorized prophets, if you will, and they were prophesying various different things. Among them, that Moshe Rabbeinu is not going to end up taking the Jewish people into Eretz Yisrael. Now, Tzipora, Moshe's wife, was standing next to Miriam, Moshe's sister, when someone came and said, Eldad and Medad are prophesizing, which is a bad thing. And Tzipora commented to Miriam, Oi, I feel bad for their wives, because their husbands, these individuals, will separate from their wives just like my husband Moshe separated from me. He's a prophet. He separated from me, which nobody knew, including Moshe's sister. But she assumed that if Moshe did it, then these prophets are doing it as well. And she said, I feel bad for the wives. Now Miriam was disappointed. She ran to Aaron and she said, what's going on here? Moshe separated from his wife? Now Moshe obviously was a great prophet, as we'll soon see some of the explanations of why this happened. I want to clarify 2 things before we go on. First of all, Miriam, the way the Rebbe explains this, meant well. She was disappointed that a Jewish family was broken up. And she felt that if Moshe will live together with Tzipora, there'll be more of Moshe's children. Why would you want to stop that? And secondly, to clarify and underscore that in Jewish tradition, unlike other beliefs, it's not holy or more spiritual not to be married. Okay, Moshe was the exception, as we'll see. There are other schools of thought that the holier somebody is, they don't get involved with the world, they don't get married. But in Yiddishkeit, in Judaism, actually the holier you are, one of the marks of the high priest, of the Kohen Gadol in the Beis HaMikdash, was that he was married. And if he wasn't married, he couldn't be the high priest. We don't see it as a negative, we see it as a prerequisite. It's a necessary positive for that. But in any case, Miriam goes to Moshe's brother, they're both of their brothers, Aaron, and says, Moshe, what's going on? They're speaking about the Isha Kushis, which literally is translated as the black one that Moshe took. Now, why are they referring to Moshe's wife with the term Kushis? So Rashi tells us, interestingly, that the word Kushis is the same gematria, the numerical equation, of 736. That's the number. Every letter in Hebrew has a number. Right? Chai is 18, Aleph is 1, Beis is 2. So Isha Kushis is 736. And the number 736 is also the same equivalent as Yefas Mare, which means a beautiful appearance. She was nicknamed Kushis because of this numerical value of that word, which means beautiful appearance, implying that her beauty was one of internal beauty and external beauty. That Tzipora was the person who was pleasant in her ways, the way she behaved spiritually, in her deeds, and also her appearance. And Moshe supposedly left his wife, Tzipora. So Miriam was talking to Aaron and saying, what's going on? What happened here? Why did this take place? Now Hashem heard what they were talking about. He always listening, right? And Hashem said that this is not good. Why is Miriam talking to Aaron negatively about Moshe? So Hashem appeared to both of them, to all three of them actually. Hashem called Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, come to the tent of meeting, and I'm going to talk to you. And without any warning, they had to go to the tent, and a cloud descended, which indicated, was symbolic of Hashem's presence. And Hashem started to speak to them. And Hashem said that Moshe Rabbeinu, this prophet, is unlike any other prophet. He's not just another prophet. Prophets are all spiritual and all holy. But Moshe is different. I don't speak to him in a vision, in a metaphor, in some kind of out-of-body experience, and he gets a message from the divine. Rather, Hashem says, Moshe speaks to me face to face. Okay, just like you talk to your friend, it's not an out-of-body experience, hopefully. It's a direct conversation. The person's on your level. Most other prophets, when they hear information, they're in a faint or in somewhat of even sleeping, certain prophets. It's in a vision. Moshe is talking to Hashem like a peer in that sense. That level of prophecy, obviously, it's Hashem. Moshe is human, but that's the level of prophecy. And therefore, Hashem is implying to them, don't talk about this great prophet. You don't know. There's more to the story, and there is more to the story. Moshe was the exception about separating from his wife and so on. But the concept is that Hashem is disappointed with Aaron and with Miriam. Miriam takes the blame because she's the one that spoke up. Aaron just listened. But she's disappointed. He's disappointed. Why? Miriam would speak negatively about her brother Moshe. When this cloud departed, Miriam notices she has tsaras. Tsaras was the biblical punishment. If you spoke lashon hara, you spoke negative about someone else, it's wrongly translated as leprosy. It's not leprosy, but let's just say it's the closest. It's a skin condition which caused the person to be impure. As soon as they realize this, Aaron turns to Moshe and says, okay, please pray for her. We've sinned. And they're asking Hashem to forgive them. We spoke negatively. We shouldn't have spoken. We apologize. We own up. Please pray for her. She should be healed. Let's get rid of this tsaras. Let's get rid of this skin condition, this punishment of speaking negatively about Moshe, the great prophet. And Hashem tells Moshe that Miriam has to be quarantined. This is, by the way, the rule for various impurities, but tsaras among them. The way to get rid of this tsaras is they would have to be separated or secluded for 7 days. And after the 7 days, they inspect it, and if the tsaras actually got smaller and it's getting less, then they get healed. One of the reasons behind this is that during the 7-day seclusion, a person thinks a little bit about maybe not talking negatively about others. Maybe I shouldn't speak lashon hara. It's a time where a person, it's jail with a purpose, not just to keep them away from people, but to allow the individual to think a little bit about their behaviors. So Hashem tells Moshe that Miriam should be secluded for 7 days, and then she should come back to the rest of the camp. Now Rashi tells us like this. Chumash says, the nation did not travel. At that point, we were ready to move on our journey. This is before the sin of the golden calf. This is before the sin of the Meraglim. Okay, we're ready to move on to Eretz Yisrael, up and on to Israel. We all waited for 7 days until Miriam finishes her seclusion, and then we'll move out. We'll move on. So millions of people are waiting. Why? Because Miriam has to wait. We're all going to wait for her. So while it was a terrible time in her life, it's the lowest point probably, where she's being punished by Hashem for speaking negatively against Moshe. And again, she meant well. She wanted to have this family together. But it was not her place. It was inappropriate, and she shouldn't have spoken that way. The problem, you go to Moshe and you ask him. You don't start talking to start a family feud. What does this mean? And why are they doing this? You have an issue, talk to him. But because of that, she's being punished. But a little bit of a glimmer of light, if you will, something positive in this whole story, is that the entire Jewish nation is waiting, not for a few minutes, but for 7 days until she's fit to travel with them, and only then will they move on. Why does she get this reward? Yes, she was a prophetess, she was a holy spiritual person, Rashi tells us it's a reward because she also waited for someone many years before. She waited for Moshe. Let's go back in history. Over 80 years, 81 years before this story. Jewish people are in Mitzrayim. Parei makes a terrible decree against the Jewish people. Every boy that's born has to be killed. Girls he's fine with. He felt that he could assimilate the nation if the girls, with the girls alive. The boys, stargazers told him that a Jewish boy is going to be born and take the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim. So to avoid that, he said, okay, we're killing all the boys. Moshe Rabbeinu was born to his mother, Yocheved, and she has to drown the boy, throw him into the Nile River. That was the decree. And what she did was she put him in a beautiful basket, waterproofed the outside, and placed him in the Nile River, hoping maybe something will happen. Not going to go kill the child. We're not going to let the Egyptians kill him. She actually tried to conceal him for a few months, but there was some point she just had to put him out. And Moshe's sister Miriam stood, she was 7 years old. She stood by the riverbank and watched what's going to happen with my brother. And as a reward for the time that she waited to watch what happens with that basket, Hashem rewards her, midah keneged midah, measure for measure, that she is going to, the whole Jewish nation is going to wait for her and not travel while she's quarantined. Even though it's a punishment for her and she spoke negative and all that, she gets rewarded. It's a fascinating Gemara. The Gemara in Seita Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, in Seita page 11a, tells us that it talks about measure for measure. That when someone does something wrong, Hashem punishes them in a comparable way. The same way that they've done it, that's the way that they're going to be punished. But the Gemara says in the name of Rava that when it comes to good rewards, Hashem rewards even greater than the measure that you've done. So if you hurt someone, let's just say 4 degrees, then a person will get punished also 4 degrees in the same measure. But if you did a good thing, says the Gemara, then you'll get rewarded many times over. And the proof that he uses is from this story with Miriam. What did she do? She waited by the riverbank for an amount of time. Okay, it says sha'ash and it's akva, the time that she was waiting. If it's an hour or a half, a little bit of time. As a result, for 7 days, millions of people are waiting. That means when it comes to reward, when it comes to positivity, when it comes to getting compensation, we're doing good, we get rewarded multiple times. The Tosefta on this section in Torah tells us that she was rewarded 500 times as much. Because sha'ah doesn't mean an hour, that Tosefta says. It means whether it's a quarter, 1/3 or 1/4 of an hour. The Tosefta says she was rewarded 500 times more because the amount of time that we waited for her versus the amount of time that she inconvenienced herself and waited on the side of the river is 500 times less. So she was rewarded 500 times fold. So you see from here that when it comes to positive that Hashem does, it's many times greater than when it is for the justice of or the discipline of negativity. It's way greater, incommensurate. So it's a beautiful thing. We see what happens with Miriam and how she gets rewarded as a result. But I want to ask you a question. What's the alternative? No one could survive in a desert, okay? What, the Jewish people are going to leave and Miriam is going to stay alone because she can't be part of the camp? Okay, again, you can't survive on your own. She has to stay secluded 7 days. Everyone leaves. And then 7 days later, she could start to travel. She won't survive.
She has to stay or she has to be out of the camp?
No, it says Teisha. She has to sit. She has to be secluded in that area, and she can't travel. So you gave her an honor, it says, thanks to what she did for Moshe 81 years ago, when she was 7 years old, and Moshe was a few months old. As a result, we're going to honor her. What's the alternative? Not to wait?
I think there's something much deeper here.
Okay.
Miriam,
Let's finish this question. What's the alternative? She'll die? It's a desert. Nobody survives in the desert for a week on her own. They're going to leave. Second question, what would he do with everyone else? She wasn't the only one that spoke negative about people, right? Someone spoke Lashon Hara. Someone got punished with saras in the desert. The Jewish people, they travel, they're moving, right? Some places we stayed for 2 days, some places we stayed for 19 years, right? There was no telling. The cloud moved, we moved. Someone spoke negative. They die? They can't survive on their own. Even the Jewish people were only surviving miraculously.
Who gets the well?
Very good. You're saying Miriam,
So,
to clarify, Miriam had a well. The Jewish people had a well of water. The merit of Miriam was traveling well, was a miraculous stone that gave water. You're saying if she was stuck, maybe she had the well. Very good.
so what I wanted to say, you mentioned Midah Keneged Midah. Remember, Miriam is credited for saving the Jewish nations because
Very good.
the
Yeah,
decree
even more because
was-
she got Moshe
So
to.
the nation now returned
Very
to
good.
Miriam and stuck by
Oh,
Miriam.
very
That's Midah Keneged Midah.
Excellent. So you're saying that the whole point that Moshe was even born because Pari made a decree that Jewish boys have to be killed. So Moshe's parents, just briefly, Amram and Yocheved, they decided to separate. Amram said, "Who needs children to be killed?" And Miriam, the little girl, was the one that went to her father and said, "What if we have a daughter? What if you have a daughter?" So she convinced him. Okay, it's very good. But Rashi brings a different thing. Rashi says because she waited, and because she waited, they waited for her. And my question is, the Rebbe's question, look at the Sichos, volume 18. He says, "This is a reward. This is honor. This is life and death." And what happened with everyone else that spoke negative? Did we just leave because they don't have this merit that they once waited for Moshe when he was a baby? How did this work? So to understand this, we have to understand a little bit about how tzaras worked and what the process was in the desert. The rule is that someone that has this condition has to be quarantined outside of the machane, outside of the camp. There were 3 camps for the Jewish people in the desert. Inside the curtains of the Mishkan was machane Shechina. Okay, from that was the holiest camp. Outside of that were the Leviim, the Levites around that. And around there was all the other Jewish people stationed based on their shevet. That's the way they were positioned. That was around them. Someone who spoke negative has to go out from all the 3 camps fully. Okay. By the way, those that are watching online, you could ask questions, subscribe, share the video. We'd love to address it. If you're watching on the replay, you could put your comments. I'll try to answer them as well. Without getting into all the details of what those camps represented and why there were, Rashi tells us, Bishas chanoyoson, which means while they're camped. You could only be outside the camp if there's a camp. You only have a camp when you're positioned, when you're stationed. So if the Jewish people were traveling, this whole restriction that you can't be you have to be outside the camp would not apply. Because there is no camp. There is no outside of camp because there's no in camp. What would happen? The Jewish people, if someone had tzaras, if someone spoke negative, they have to be quarantined. You wait. We're traveling now. When we get to the next place, we'll stop. And then you'll leave the camp after the camp is set up. And you'll wait your 7-day seclusion period. But you're not going to wait now while the Jewish people travel. So again, in normal times, if we're in Israel or we're in the desert and we're camped, if someone has to be quarantined, they leave the camp and they start the 7-day process. If we're starting to travel now, then we'll travel. And you'll travel along and you're not restricted from any of these camps. Probably can't go to the holiest one, but you're not restricted. And when we park and we set up camp, then you have to leave the camp because it's a 7-day quarantine process. So what would happen to Miriam is we would put on hold her need to be secluded and wait till the next travel. They could travel for a couple of days, they could travel for whatever it was. They'll park and then she'll be secluded. So what really happened here was instead of making Miriam wait until the next time we stop and we set up camp and then she'll start her 7-day process. So during this period, she has tzaras, she's in pain, she's ashamed, she's in her negative state, if you will. We say, you know what? Hold everything as a courtesy, as an honor, and we'll let her start her process now, get over with it, and then we'll travel. Anyone else? Sorry, we're traveling now. You'll have to wait. So instead of having a 7-day waiting period, it could be 10 days, 12 days, whatever, longer. So the honor that she's getting is not, life and death. She would survive. She would still travel. What the Rebbe answers is that we're giving her the opportunity to alleviate her pain even for a couple days. That's the honor. Okay? But let's go a little bit further. Let's take this deeper. It's very good that she's getting rewarded for standing by Moshe, and her reward is a courtesy. Instead of having to wait a few days, to start her process, she gets to start it earlier, so she has this easier time and quicker time to move on with her life, be healed, and let's go. Is that a fair reward? Standing for Moshe Rabbeinu, essentially you saved his life. Okay, you're standing there, watching him in a river, and what's the reward you get? We just said you get commensurate, 500 times as much, etc., etc. What's the reward he gets? She gets a couple of days. They shorten your period. Instead of having to wait until we camped, and then you'll start your quarantine process, she leaves right away. That's the reward. And besides, wouldn't anyone do that? If your brother was being placed in a river in a basket, you want to know what's going on. So you stood there. She was 7 years old. It was her brother. She stood there. So the reward that she gets, what reward? Why do you need a reward? It's a basic thing. And if you're giving a reward for saving his life, then why is this the reward? A couple of days? You said they should wait till you travel. It's not enough of a reward. That sounds so incomparable to what she did. Instead of having to wait till we finish traveling and then we'll go, you do it earlier. Big deal. Okay. So let's look at the story, what happened. Miriam convinces her parents to remarry. They have a child. Okay, this child is Moshe. There's a terrible decree. He has to be thrown in a river. So Yocheved, his mother, hides him. And then after a couple of months, she couldn't hide him anymore. She puts him in a basket. And Miriam was watching how this basket travels along the river. Now, Moshe's mother hoped maybe an Egyptian will find this baby and take him out. Maybe someone will take this baby out and then he'll survive. Okay? What could Miriam do, Moshe's sister? What could she really do to help her brother? She's no match against Egyptian soldiers. She's 7 years old. If someone takes the baby or she tries to take the baby out, there's no way. If soldiers take her, she can't fight to get him back. If an Egyptian family takes this baby out of the basket, they have to conceal his identity. Because if Pari finds out that his Jewish boy was saved, they'll be killed. There's no way she could even contact them. What could she do? She's just watching. And then what happens?
She did bring Yocheved.
Yeah, but then one second. So then what happens? Basya, Pari's daughter, goes to bathe, and she stretches out her hand, miraculously her hand stretched. She takes the basket, and she tries to give the baby to nurse by Egyptian mothers, right? She sees a little baby that's crying, and she says, hey, this baby must be hungry. She calls over a wet nurse from the Egyptians and says, feed this baby. And Moshe refuses to eat. The little baby, he won't eat. So the mouth that will speak to Hashem, to the Shekhinah, didn't want to have that, would not eat from the idol worshippers nursing. But here the baby is there. So what does Yocheved do? She goes over to Basya, Miriam, Moshe's sister, goes over to Basya and says, should I get you a Jewish nurse? He pays her. She doesn't know it's his mother. And he goes back home for a period of time. And he's raised by his own mother. And he's nursed, okay, and raised. And by the way, that's how he kept in touch with them. And later he knew who he was, and he was Jewish, and so on and so forth. But think about it for a second. Let's assume that the 7-year-old girl would not go over to the princess and tell her should I bring you this Jewish nurse? What would happen? She would figure it out on her own. She would somehow, this princess would say, this baby is not eating from this one, from that one, from this one. Let's try a Jewish nurse. He's a Jewish boy. Yocheved didn't really save Moshe's life. Okay? He was taken out of the basket not because of Yocheved, not because of Miriam. He was taken out of the water, right, by Basya. He would have eaten anyways. She would have found a way to feed him. Right? She came in. What she ended up doing was she saved time. Moshe was hungry. He was in pain. And what his sister did was, by walking over bravely to this princess, okay, of the enemy, Pari's daughter. Turns out she was a great person. She saved Moshe and gave him his name, by the way. But she went over to her and said, should I get you a Jewish nurse? This way, her brother was able to eat earlier. He was able to get rid of his pain and suffering a few minutes or a few hours earlier than if she would have done it on her own. What's the reward? When she's in the desert, instead of having to wait until the Jewish people camp and then she'll start her process of healing, which is a few day delay, we say right now we're gonna have everyone wait. You start your healing process. So just caused Moshe to have pain lessened for a little bit. Her pain and shame and so on was lessened by a little bit. And the concept is like this: that first of all, that's why it's a befitting reward, because that's exactly what she did. She alleviated Moshe's pain. She lessened this boy's hunger for a little bit. That temporary relief is very valuable. It means a lot. People make the mistake and they think, I'm not going to solve the problem, or someone else will deal with it a little bit later. Who cares? A little bit shortening, right? The baby's crying in the middle of the night and you get up, stuff. Okay, not the baby in the middle of the night, that's major. But when it comes to things that you're not solving someone's issue, you're just lessening it. You make them feel a little bit better about themselves, being there for someone. You didn't solve their problem. Someone's suffering. They want to talk to you. All you're doing is listening to them, giving them a few minutes of relief. And you're making them feel good, or you're motivating them. You didn't solve their issue. It's greater than you. And in some cases, greater than the best doctors, God forbid. But you're being there a little bit for them. That's tremendous. And Hashem repays. He rewards. You see by Miriam, he rewarded her. That the entire Jewish nation, millions of people, waited for a week before this whole thing in order to enable her to start her healing process earlier. I want to conclude with a story which shows us the idea of reward and how Hashem rewards. It's a fascinating story because these stories are rare. There was an Israeli soldier named Yoni in the IDF. He was stationed in Hebron, protecting the Jewish people from terrorists and other terrible things. And one night, he's positioned alone in a certain area, and in the early hours of the morning, a terrorist shot him. I don't know if it was from a building or from behind something. He shot him, and no one was around. And this soldier was bleeding to death. Literally, slowly, the blood was leaving his body, and he was unconscious, and it's a matter of time he's going to die. There was another soldier that heard the shot. Again, early in the morning, no one's around. And this soldier decided to explore a gunshot. Where? What alleys? And he finds this soldier. And they get him help. They take him to the hospital. And he's being, transfusions or whatever else, he's being saved. And as soon as the soldier felt that this soldier was out of danger, he left. Yoni's parents get a call. They were living in Kiryat Malachi in Israel. They get a call that their son's in the hospital, a soldier, terrible, it's the worst thing. They run to the hospital, and they're with their child, and thank God he's surviving. She wants to thank the soldier that saved him, but she doesn't know who the soldier is. No one knows. For whatever reason, it wasn't recorded. The soldier dropped him off. It took him to call for help. It wasn't recorded. So while she was celebrating her son's miraculous survival, but there was an emptiness because she didn't know who it was. She wanted to thank him. Now, she and her husband, they own a little store in Kiryat Malachi, a convenience store, a little grocery store, nothing major. So she hung up a sign and she wrote in the store, if this and this night, my son was a soldier in Hebron, was shot, another unknown soldier saved his life, literally, and we'd like to thank him, at the least. And she hung it up and hoped that maybe somebody will see it. Months went by. One day, a woman comes in and she says, I think, when was this? What date was it? He was elated. He shared with us how he saved a soldier's life. It was the best time in his life. I mean, literally, he saved someone's life. And phenomenal thing, amazing and everything. But we never met. So the mother of Yoni, the soldier that was saved, said, we got to make a meeting. They get a hold of both fathers and both sons. They come Yoni's mother aside. I want to talk to you. Do you recognize me? Have you met? Yes, we met. 20 years ago, I used to live in Kiryat Malachi, she says. And I would come here to buy stuff, groceries. And one day you saw that I was not in a good mood. I was very down. I was in the store buying bread and milk, and I was very down. And you decided to ask me what's wrong. Most people don't do that. Stranger in the store. You asked me what's wrong. And I told you, listen, it was a very difficult time in my life then, and there was no money, and there was a lot of issues at home, and I was pregnant, and I decided with my husband that we're going to do an abortion. God forbid. And as soon as you heard that, you called your husband, you stopped your store, your sales, your everything you were doing in the middle of your day, and you sat with me and convinced me that the nicest range and don't get stuck in this challenge, on and on. I had a child. We named him Yair. And 20 plus years later, he's in Hebron and he hears a gunshot. And God repaid you because my son Yair went, and the boy that he saved was your son, Yoni. Reward, Hashem repays many times over. And don't think it's only about saving a life. Even if you're alleviating someone's pain for just a little bit, a temporary relief. Moshe was crying, and his sister got him a wet nurse earlier, gets saved in that tremendous measure. Thank you for joining. Join us again next week. Next morning, tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.
יש,
So I have a few questions.